Training effectiveness refers to the benefits that a company and trainees receive from training. Benefits for trainees may include learning new skills or behaviors. Benefits for the organization include increased sales and more satisfied customers. A training evaluation measures specific outcomes or criteria to determine the benefits of the program. Training outcomes or criteria refer to the measures that the trainer and the company use to evaluate training programs. Training evaluation refers to the process of collecting the outcomes needed to determine whether training was effective. The evaluation process should begin with determining training needs. Needs assessment helps focus the evaluation by identifying the purpose of the program, the resources needed, and the outcomes that will provide evidence that the program was effective. The next step in the process is to identify specific, measurable training objectives to guide the program. The more specific and measurable these objectives are, the easier it is to identify relevant outcomes for the evaluation. Besides considering the learning and program objectives and delivering learning outcomes, it might be also important to consider the expectations of those individuals who support the program and have invested in it. Once the outcomes have been identified, the next step is to determine an evaluation strategy. Factors such as expertise, how quickly the information is needed, change potential, and organizational culture should be considered in choosing a design. Planning and executing the evaluation involves previewing the program as well as collecting training outcomes according to the evaluation design. The results of the evaluation are used to modify, market, or gain additional support for the program. To evaluate its training program, a company must decide how it will determine the program's effectiveness. That is, it must identify what training outcomes or criteria it will measure. This figure shows categories of training outcomes: reaction outcomes, learning or cognitive outcomes, behavioral and skill outcomes, and affirmative outcomes. Let's explore each. Our first outcome, reaction outcomes, refer to trainees' perceptions of the program, including the facilities, trainers, and content. They are often called class or instructor evaluations. This information is typically collected at the program's conclusion. You probably have been asked to complete a class or instructor evaluation either at the end of a college course or a training program at work. Reactions are useful for identifying what trainees thought was successful or inhibited learning. Reaction outcomes are level 1 reaction criteria according to the framework that's discussed in your text. Reaction outcomes are typically collected via questionnaires and completed by trainees. A reaction measure should include questions related to the trainee's satisfaction with the instructor, training materials, training administration, as well as the clarity of course objectives and usefulness of the training content. Cognitive outcomes are used to determine the degree to which trainees are familiar with the principles, facts, techniques, procedures, and processes emphasized in the training program. Cognitive outcomes measure what knowledge trainees learned in the program. Typically, pencil and paper tests are used to assess cognitive outcomes. These items help to measure whether a trainee knows how to make a decision. Skill-based outcomes are used to assess the level of technical or motor skills and behaviors. Skill-based outcomes include acquisition or learning of skills, skill learning, and the use of those skills on the job, called skill transfer. The extent to which trainees have learned skills that can be evaluated by observing their performance in work samples, such as simulators. Skill transfer is usually determined by observation. And finally, affective outcomes include attitudes and motivation. Effective outcomes that might be collected in an evaluation include tolerance for diversity, motivation to learn, safety attitudes, and customer service orientation. Effective outcomes can be measured by using surveys. The specific attitude of interest depends on the program objectives.